Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. Sabine, I think you had no tone because we were on mute, but hopefully you can hear us now. Welcome everyone. It's really nice to see you all introducing yourselves and great to have such an international audience with us today as we talk about how to build trust in international teams. I think it's such an important topic at the moment, and particularly when we're working internationally, we have this idea of being out of sight, meaning out of mind. So how do we trust people when we can't see them, look at their eyes and monitor what they're doing? I was doing a workshop the other day and we talked about what the challenges were when working in virtual teams, and someone said there's no control. And I think our argument would be where there's trust, we don't need that control. So that's something we'll explore as we go through the webinar today. And I'm delighted to have with us Abby Beckley from our partners at WorldWork. One of the main goals of today is to introduce you to the Trust in Teams indicator. And Abby's been instrumental in putting that together and helping us also to get ready to share it with you. So welcome, Abby. It's great always to be working with you. Before we get started, hi, just a few quick admin things. We do try and make it interactive. There are a lot of people with us today, which is great, but obviously it can be hard to hear all your voices. We keep you on mute, but that doesn't mean you can't join in. Most of you have used the chat already. We might also ask you to annotate the slides. There's a hand up function as well at the top. I don't know if you can see that. There's a little person with their hand up. Can I ask you just to raise your hand if this is your first webinar with us? So if it's not, you can take it down, but it'd be interesting to see how many people are new to this format. So a mix. So welcome to both new and old. Old in the sense of how many webinars you've done with us. But just going back to the drawing thing, for those that are new particularly, you'll see on the left-hand side of your screen against the slides, there are some icons. So for example, there is a T. If you click on that T and then click somewhere on this slide, that should enable you to type something on the slide. There's also a little pen, which is the second one down, I think, for most of you. That enables you to draw if you're feeling a little bit more creative. So you could do. So just a quick overview of what we hope to share with you today. One of the things that I find interesting and challenging about trust is it's not one definition for us all. So we'll look at how we define trust and what it means to different cultures, but also different individuals, and really highlight why it's so important, particularly in the context of teams and in the context of international teams. Like I said before, when we're working at a distance, it can be a little bit more challenging to build those trusting relationships. And then, yes, we want to showcase the Team Trust Indicator and perhaps highlight, for those of you who work in international teams yourselves, how that might help you in your work, and perhaps give you some examples where we've seen it be really successful. So I think I said before, but trust is such an abstract term. We think we know what it means, but we can't touch it. We can't feel it. It's very intangible. So what I'd like to ask you to do is to tell us in one word or a few words what trust really means for you. So this is your chance either to use those tools I showed you on the slide or just to use the chat function to give us your definition. Either your one word synopsis or give us a few words to describe how you interpret trust. And I think this is quite interesting as we look at the work we do across cultures, how trust really does differ according to your values, your beliefs, the way you've been brought up, the way you work. But I think it's also very personal, and there is that danger sometimes of labeling cultures. So we'll talk about the individual as well as the cultural. So thank you. I can see a few things coming up. So you can rely on someone. I'm seeing in the chat, you don't need to hide anything. So again, lots of abstract words come up to describe this abstract concept. So things like honesty, mutual understanding of how to reach a target, a goal. That's interesting. What's said will be done. So the themes of things like transparency, reliability, confidence. I don't know if the person that wrote that could elaborate, because I'm wondering if that's maybe a false friend, or maybe it is about confidence that someone will do what they've said. Empowerment, that's a nice word, Scott. Sorry, Abby.
I said perhaps confidence in someone, confidence
Yes.
that they will, that they will
Yes.
be, as they say they will be.
I was just thinking of certainly in the Latin languages, confiance in French, confianza in Spanish, and I think maybe that has an impact on how trust is seen in those cultures.
The semantics of it, yes.
Yeah, interesting. Confidence. Yes, this is what I mean. Have confidence in someone. Thank you, Christina. That's great. Okay, well, we'll park those there, but it's interesting to see the similarities, but also some of the different interpretations of what it means. So thank you for doing that. What I always do in these situations is go back to the dictionary. So I had a look online, and here's what I came up with. So the firm belief in the reliability, truth, or ability of someone or something. So some of the themes that you mentioned. And then another one, if you trust someone, you believe they're honest and sincere, and it won't deliberately do anything, and they or it won't do anything to harm you. So again, kind of different but similar. So we're seeing a little bit of a theme coming through. And I think obviously we're talking about trust in the workplace today, and it's so important now. We're increasingly expected to do a lot more with a lot less. We're more and more interdependent on each other. We rely on people. And again, it's often people that we don't get to look in the eyes and be sure that, we know that we can count on them. So we need greater levels of trust, I think, increasingly. And I'm just going to let Abby talk a little bit more about this and why trust is so important in the workplace and some of the research and statistics that really back this up.
Yes, indeed. Trust in the workplace. Research has shown, I think in many resources that you could look at, articles in different journals, they've shown the impact of trust, what it does to productivity, improving it. There's a lower level of turnover in staff when you have a trusting environment, and if the organization is one that's high in trust, you see that staff are retained because they feel dedicated and feel loyal to the organization because of the trust levels that have been built up. There's improved communication because there isn't a sense or a fear that your thoughts or your input is not worthwhile. There is a much greater sense of participation in decision making. So employees feel that they are part of the development of the organization, that their voices are being heard, and they're part of the future of the organization. Trust opens up avenues to innovation, because when people feel that they can be relied upon, they feel trusted, and they trust in their leaders, then it opens up the space to be able to discuss, to be able to bring up ideas, to not feel that what you say will be rejected, and then innovation flourishes. And also, within a trust environment, you get a greater support for change initiatives because people feel that the organization knows where it's going, they trust in the decisions being made, and they feel that they are part of it. There's a sense of inclusivity, and so people will walk hand in hand with their leaders, with the organization, and enable room for change. So there are so many different papers and so many different studies that show this. For example, from Interaction Associates, they said 8 out of 10 employees report that a high level of trust in the organization will foster innovation and investment in new projects. And Stephen Covey, who did a paper in, I think it was the Harvard Business Review, said the ability to establish, grow, extend, and restore trust is the key professional and personal competency of our time. I'm sure we all could all agree that we live in an age where there seems to be diminishing trust in organizations, in government, in business generally. So I don't think we can overstate the importance of it and the importance of nurturing it within the organization you work with and within the teams that you work with, I guess, as a starting point.
One thing I read recently, Abby, which I found quite interesting, was some research that suggested that actually in virtual teams, the levels of trust can often be higher, which surprised me. And I don't know what you think about that, whether you've read that, but I wonder whether there's... Go on, sorry, you tell me.
Yeah, no, I was saying I hadn't read that, but I would imagine that there is a sense that because they are not face-to-face, because they are not in the same room, maybe there is an increased awareness that they've got to work on trust levels if anything's going to happen, if they're going to be successful in their undertaking. So perhaps that notion that we've got to overcome any virtual boundaries and virtual barriers increases the willingness to trust one another. So they work on it, they're aware of it, they're focused on it, and therefore it ends up being higher.
Yeah, and I think, just thinking out loud, but I guess organizations where there's a culture of flexibility, people working from home, working from different locations, that suggests a trust in their employees. So if there's that culture of flexibility, maybe there's also that culture of trust within teams that kind of trickles down. But it's an interesting one to explore, I think.
I think that all feeds into it.
So we're going to ask you to do, you, our audience, to do another short exercise for us. Again, just to highlight the kind of individual nature of trust, particularly in the workplace. I know I was running one of these workshops recently, and one of the participants at the start just said, well, you either trust people or you don't. But then we explored it a bit more, and it became very clear that trust was very different for each individual person in the room. And this was one of the exercises we did. So what I'd like you to share with us, if you would like to, is perhaps some of the things which impede your ability to trust a colleague or a teammate or someone you manage. What are the things that cause you to lose trust? But then on the positive side, what are your trust builders? So what are those actions or qualities or personality traits that make you really feel you can trust another colleague? Just to let you know, I think most of you are aware, but if you want to be anonymous, it's always better to write on the slide. If you're happy to share, then obviously the chat function works just as well. So on the left-hand side, what impedes trust for you? And on the right-hand side, what is it that gives you trust? What helps you to trust your colleagues? It'll be very interesting, particularly with this international mix that we have here with us today, to see what kind of things come up for you.
Yeah, and how different they might be, or how similar. It all adds interest.
Yes, and I think obviously we've kept this exercise quite simple, but I think there is sometimes a difference in terms of maybe what you need to trust your manager, but then what do you need to trust people that report to you, that kind of changing dynamic on the hierarchy. So previous experience, I wonder if that's kind of previous bad experiences, I guess, would be a trust buster. If someone's let you down before, you've got that kind of, that memory embedded in your mind. So let's have a look what else. Let me just...
Bad pursuing alternate agendas, not delivering.
Yep. So someone that can walk the talk. So it's not just the words, it's also the actions that that really count. There's a model some of you may have come across, which is the I think it's called the Trust Quota, and they talk about the need for credibility plus reliability plus intimacy. So you need to be able to talk the talk, but also walk the walk at the same time. And that intimacy piece I find quite interesting, which is that need to feel safe, to feel valued, to feel that personal connection. And some of the research done by that organisation really does suggest that that's the fundamental part of trust for many of us. Great, so we've got a lot of different things coming through. Knowledge and experience on the chat. So something about a common project. And that's interesting, whether it's their benefit first or the common benefit. And just going back to that trust quota, the final piece is all those positives around credibility, reliability, and intimacy can become negated if there's a high level of self-interest. So for many of us, there's a need to know that you have my interests at heart just as much as your own. So yeah, pursuing alternate agendas, not delivering. So there's a real mix of things here. So thank you very much. Something around communication as well, leadership, which again can mean many different things to many people. So I think there's some food for thought and some things that we can hopefully unpick as we go through, because obviously one of our key messages is that trust is complex, and I know those of you who are in the intercultural field as we are may have seen there's some of the theorists look at trust as whether it's through the heart or the head, whether it's more cognitive or more affective. And I think there is some truth in that. You know, relationship focused cultures tend to need more focus on the affective. Task focused cultures perhaps more on the brain side, the cognitive need for trust, so the reliability, the competence, etc. But I think, you know, there is a danger of that being quite simplistic, and most of us actually do need that affective side as well. And what really drew me to the work that World Work have put together in this tool is the kind of greater level of sophistication in the tool. And their model actually has 9 separate criteria for trust. And I think, Abby, you're just going to walk us through the criteria and how you came to select these and what they really mean.
So the TTI tool, as Kathy said, is made up of 9 trust criteria. And these criteria are culturally sensitive. So the process that we went by was we gathered data, I think it was over 1,000 responses from people from different parts of the world. And then the data was mined to pick up words and ideas that people were using to talk about trust. And from that, we're able to pull off these 9 criteria, which cover the elements of trust in a professional environment, in a working environment. We're not touching on trust necessarily in a social scenario, because that might need other criteria within it. But in the workplace, in a team, committed was one of the criteria we looked at, and it was really interesting to see the responses that everybody was putting down. And I think I hope you'll find that as we go through the criteria, you'll feel that it's covered all the different aspects and elements of trust that are necessary for a team to be able to function well together. So committed, which means that you are working for the benefit of the team and not just your own, which I think falls in line with what Yolanda was saying about, is it their own benefit they're putting first or the common benefits. So looking at the other criteria, we have supportive, feeling that other members of the team will get behind you in the ideas that you have, and you're not swimming on your own trying to achieve the team targets. Level of empowerment. Now, this is an interesting one because depending on culture, what is defined as level of empowerment can be a different thing. But what we mean here is a balance from the leader, because also you mentioned leadership. So it's a balance between the leader giving direction, but also enabling members of the team to work on their own initiative. So it's this very delicate balance that we talk about when we say level of empowerment within the trust criteria. Competent. Certain cultures rely on this. If you are able to do your job, then that's good enough for me, and let's go ahead and do it. You know, do you have the skills? Do you have the qualifications? And a lot of the time, that can be the starting point from which people start to trust somebody in the team that they have to work, where they have to work together as team members. Honest. I think this is one of the more obvious ones. When we think about trust, the word honest, I think, just gets thrown in almost immediately, and sometimes they can feel synonymous. But so we thought this was definitely a key criteria in enabling people to work together across different cultural boundaries. Safe, another one as well. There's a really great article about psychological safety. I think Google did a study on this and the importance of it for people who are working in groups to feel that they could trust one another. Aligned. So this is when team members all feel that they're working in the same direction and towards the same purpose. And misalignment is probably one of the first things that happen when trust levels are toppling. And it can be quite a challenging one to maintain, but it's really key, because that's when if you've ever had experience of working in a team and it's been amazing, that sense of alignment is usually very, very high. You know, everyone's putting the effort in to achieve the goal and to reach the target. Inclusive, so that this is when, obviously, when you feel that you're part of the team, and any discussions being made involve you, include you, and then that creates a real sense of membership within the team. And the 9th criteria is open with information. I think somebody mentioned before when the transparency, and when information is shared and people are aware of what is happening, so that all members of the team can make an informed decision, or can put input, which is based on informed information that they've received. So those are the 9 trust criteria. I think looking at them, it'd be great to know if you feel that this covers it for you, or if there are any other elements that you think, well, actually for me also I'd want this or the other. But as I said, from the research that we did and the data mining, we found that these criteria were pretty much a conclusive picture of what is needed within a team for members to be able to trust each other.
Does anyone have any comments or thoughts or questions at this stage? Otherwise, we can move things forward. Would you say that for you personally, any of these are more important than others? Or would you suggest maybe that some are not important for you? That might be another way of commenting. Scott's asked a question. So where do shared values feature?
Shared values within, that's a really good question. I'm just thinking about when you're working in a team, if you feel that sharing values with fellow team members is something that would help you to trust them.
Does that not fit within aligned, kind of sharing the same values, common goals?
Yes, I looked at that one as well. It would be, yeah, okay.
For me, that would
feeling
fit.
Aligned. Yes.
I don't know, Abby, whether in your experience you've ever had a team where they felt they didn't need all 9 from the data that came through from individual teams, or whether it's always been a kind of a combination of the 9 that have been important.
Well, we've because the way that the tool works, it will also show if the team has an abundance of the criteria. So it also helps to celebrate the successes within the team. So we've seen quite a few times where there's a high level of competence in the team, so that team members feel that everybody knows what they're doing and they have the right qualifications and have the capability to do the work. So we like for them to celebrate that.
Yep.
And to know that they're doing something well, and they can use that to build upon any of the other aspects where they might be a bit lower.
Yeah, and I think certainly the work I've done with the tool, it's been really important to highlight the fact that it's not about fixing a dysfunctional team. It's about taking the strengths that are already prevalent in that team and building on them and increasing existing levels of trust, rather than starting from the point where, you're you're a terrible team, there's no trust. And I think that for me was a potential danger. But once I started using the tool, I realized that actually most teams have a lot to celebrate. So it's, as you say, building on the successes, celebrating where there are already high levels of trust.
Exactly, and each criteria is it's a conversation point. It's they're all sort of 9 little catalysts that you can then use to open up discussions with each other and have a way of communicating with each other in a language that's understood by all. And it's not as you say, it's not about judgment. It's not about finger pointing. There is no blame here. It's more a sense of, what are we doing well? What can we be more aware of as a team? And what can we do to improve it?
Yeah. And often, another thing I really liked was that often where there is a gap, it can be something quite deep, but it can also be something quite practical that's very easily fixed.
Exactly.
And that's quite motivating for teams as well, to realize by making a few small changes, they can actually make huge improvements. So,
yes.
So we're going to give you a little test. You probably hear colleagues complaining about these kind of things that you can see on the screen from time to time, or regularly potentially. We saw that thing before about walk the talk. So for each of these quotations, can you tell us which is the relevant criteria? So I'll just flash back to those for a second. So there are your 9 criteria. So if you'd like to write your thoughts, your answers on the screen. So if someone says, I can't rely on others to do a good job, what's the competency that's, sorry, people, someone's ahead. So yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the first one. I can't rely on others to do a good job. Then you've got, they say one thing, but they do another. They need to walk the talk. What competency might that be explaining? And then we've got, it's risky to make any mistakes, you'll be blamed. And everyone seems to have their own agenda. I think the safety thing is really interesting, because I think sometimes people think it's about having a safe building. You know, I'm not going to fall down the stairs or fall off my desk when I'm working. But actually, it's that safe environment that I can make mistakes. I can say what I think without any judgment. I feel safe when I'm part of the team. That's really important. Yeah. Right, great. So we've got some answers. Thank you very much. So, ta-da! Wonderful. Yes. So I think that's an interesting one, that last one, because having their own agenda, I guess it could be aligned, couldn't it? Abby, what do you think?
It could be
committed to the common goals, and
yes. So it's doing your own thing and not really being committed to what the team's trying to achieve. And I suppose if you're looking at aligned, then having your own agenda would mean that you're not aligned with what everybody else is trying to do. That's an interesting one. So
how would you distinguish aligned and committed? Because I can see there is a potential overlap between the two.
Well, aligned probably would be more if somebody was saying that I just don't feel that we're getting where we need to get as a team. I'm trying to go in one way, somebody's trying to go in another way, and it's more a sense of not feeling that there is a strong direction for the team, whereas having your own agenda is more of an individual, the sense that individuals are going off to do their own thing. It's more of a personal individual activity, whereas aligned is the sense of the team as a whole.
Yeah.
And not when you don't have that sense that you're all you're all cohesive in what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
So that is what we mean by aligned.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So there's a nice, very practical definition from Johnny. You're not committed. You might be committed. You might be aligned, but if you're not committed, you won't actually finish the job. So there's a more kind of practical component to the committed criteria.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. And misalignment here, Jean Pascal says maybe misalignment is more about misunderstanding. Yes, it's a sense of confusion of not knowing quite where everyone's trying to get to if a team is feeling misaligned. That's true. That's it.
Because I think when we work in international, particularly in international project teams, there's often a tension because we're part of perhaps multiple teams, or we have our own tasks as well as the team tasks. So it's being able to demonstrate commitment to the team, but not necessarily at the expense of other directions that you're being pulled in at the same time. It's kind of managing multiple priorities that's one of the biggest challenges, I always think.
This is true. I agree with you.
Okay. So I think, Abby, you were just going to talk a little bit more about the tool.
Yes. So it's a psychometric diagnostic. So members of a team would be sent questionnaires in which they would be asked what they want from fellow team members and what they perceive to be getting from fellow team members. And then all of those results would be aggregated and then represented in a report, which would then get shared amongst team members in a workshop or in a session. So it collects the results together in an anonymous fashion. So it's not possible to see who said what, but it's giving you a picture and a diagnostic of what's happening within the team as a whole. So it's the overview of what's happening in the team. So you then get to see which the highest wants are, what the highest gets are from team members, and then it also shows you any potential gaps. We'll look at that in a moment. But just wondered if anyone has any questions about how it works. Probably not for the moment. So it's looking at wants from team members, and it's looking at gets from team members. And then the algorithm does an amazing little calculation, and then it shows everybody aggregated scores from what they've responded to in the questionnaire. It's also available in, I think, 5 languages, the questionnaire, because we just think, especially with an international team, when you're asking questions about trust, it's important that participants are able to answer that question in their own language, so they really understand what's required of them, so that when they're responding, there is no room for any confusion in what the question is asking them.
So just to go into a little bit more detail, obviously the questionnaire is part of a longer process. The questionnaire is the catalyst, if you like, for generating the discussion and the outputs. So certainly the way we work with it here at LSIC is we start by talking to the team leader, understanding where the potential challenges are and what they're hoping to achieve, making sure everyone's on board as part of the process. Then obviously everyone completes the questionnaire, as Abby was mentioning, and I think it's really important to highlight the anonymity of the questionnaire and the report. Obviously it's quite a sensitive topic if you're highlighting areas where you feel you can't fully trust your colleagues, so it is important that there's nothing really revealing who said what. And you can see from the screenshot there of the questionnaire, it's very much kind of situational based. So, do my team members do this? Is it important for me in theory? And then do I get it in practice? The report forms in a sense, the basis of the workshop that we run. We normally do a half-day session, and it's very much, as I guess all workshops should be, it's the team's time, it's the team's opportunity to talk through. So as the trainer, it's very much a facilitated approach rather than a training. And I think what I found really empowering, I think, for the teams I've worked with is the amount of takeaways and practical steps that have come up as part of the conversations. And then obviously it's an ongoing process. I think, people come up with all these great ideas, but we then need to put steps in place to make sure we not only review with the team leader, but check back in and monitor how things are going. And that can be done with our help, or, you know, as part of team meetings and sort of internal interactions. It doesn't all have to be through consultants like us. It can be something that you do yourselves. So this is where it gets a little bit technical. You can see some screenshots from a sample report looking at the want and the get scores, but I'll let Abby talk a bit more about this.
Okay, so how it works is that individuals are asked a series of questions based around the 9 criteria. So the questions are all mixed up, and then they are given a chance to score their responses, as you saw in that the previous example of out of 1 to 6 for what they want, and out of 1 to 6 for what they get. And then in the report, they're able to see how they've scored in terms of the 9 criteria on both sections of the questionnaire. And then they're able to see the gap score. And as I mentioned before, sometimes you might have a negative gap, which is a plus, which means that the team is doing well on that element of the criteria. So, for example, this one here, the writing is quite small, but the one at the bottom is competent. So this team feels that fellow members are more than competent to be able to do the job that they need to do. But at the top, there is open with information, is the biggest gap score that they have. And I think more often than not, I've never certainly run a session where the team have said, no, that's not us. Quite often, because it's everybody is inputting, and it's sort of the team almost doing a self-assessment, then the results that come out in the gap scores are things that members of the team agree with, and then they determine in the session, either if it's being facilitated by somebody like Kathy would speak with the team leader and say to them, this is what's come out from the report. So when we're planning the session, they can come to an agreement on what they'll be looking at. So our general rule is to say, especially in a half-day session, perhaps to look at the top 3 gaps, certainly celebrate the successes, and then look at the top 3 gaps, and then decide to work through those and to see where these gaps might be showing themselves, and then to work through it to be able to help the team come to a good conclusion on how they will close those gaps in the way that they work together in the future. But it does go, the report itself drills into even more detail, and on the next slide we can give you an example. So for level of empowerment, which is defined as trust based on being part of a team where the leader balances the needs of the team members for clear direction and also personal autonomy. So I was saying it's that delicate balancing act. So example questions that participants would need to think about and respond to within the questionnaire are things about having the opportunity to contribute to important team decisions, being encouraged to speak their minds, feeling that they're treated as equal members of the team, and they're prepared to rely on, the leaders prepared to rely on the team in important ways. So in answering the questionnaire, the report pulls out any specific statements that team members have strongly responded to, so that in the session, this can be looked at and to say, well, there's a particular statement here. So it gets to quite a granular level with what team members are trying to say about the way they feel about the particular criteria. So at that granular level, it pulls out this information for the team to work on, and then asks also for concrete examples of where this sort of thing might be showing itself in the team. So it's taking this very sort of up in the air topic of trust, and then really pinning it down to very concrete physical activities that the team is going through, and trying to find ways to help them understand why, understand what can be done about it if it's impeding the team, or what they need to do more of if that's helping the team, if it's helping them to be productive. So it's that way of literally making an intangible concept highly tangible, and creating practical steps that the team can work on.
I think a great example I've seen of that kind of practical, tangible steps was a team where there was a gap with competence. And I kind of thought, gosh, they really think each other can't do their job properly. But as we drilled down, it became clear it was mainly to do with a lack of training. And particularly where people needed to cover for each other's roles and responsibilities, they hadn't necessarily had the training to be able to do that. So it was a very easy win and a very kind of practical fix to up those levels of trust. So I think that is a really important point. But I think, we do very much take a coaching approach when we're working with teams, looking at these trust gaps. And I think one of the reasons is, trust is quite a funny topic. It's quite personal, and certainly the teams I've worked with have initially felt quite uncomfortable about it. So I just wanted to ask you, how do you feel about discussing trust with your colleagues? Hopefully you can see there's a poll with 4 different options. So if you'd like to vote, just to get a sense of how comfortable are we as a group in terms of how we talk about trust, that would be interesting to see. I'll just give you a moment to click on the appropriate button. So let's have a look. I think that should be everyone now. So, ooh, take that away. So I was just showing you what everyone had voted, but I think you could see. I know there was one person I think who'd voted that it's an instinctive thing, perhaps not something that we can work on explicitly. But it seemed that most people were divided between either feeling it is important to talk about, but a lot of people felt that the negative angle is perhaps harder to talk about. And that's certainly been my experience working with teams, that initially there's a little bit of reticence. And I think that's why the kind of coaching question structure works really well. So just following on from Abby talking about level of empowerment, there are some examples here of some of the questions that people might talk about in their teams. And in my experience, it works best when you almost let the team go. And as the facilitator, you're there to jump in and to kind of manage the conversation back to where it needs to be going. But it's really the team doing the work and having the conversations. And then that helps them to build their own action plan as well. So there's an element of reflecting, but I think as hopefully we've been highlighting, the important part really is how do we take this forward? What can we do differently? What needs to change to increase the high levels of trust? And also, what will it be like? What will it look like if we really trust each other? How might things be better if we put in the effort to really to give each other what we need in terms of trust? And I think just to touch really on the outputs for the teams, because I think this is really important. So there is that high level, hopefully increased self-awareness, but also awareness of others, and the realization that we don't all require the same thing to trust each other. But I think almost more importantly is the action plan that teams take away. And part of that is, as part of the pack, you do get these coaching questions. So we really start you on the journey, and then the work is with the team to take it forward. So it's a little bit blurry, but I just thought it would be nice to share a screenshot of one of the kind of action plans that one of our teams put together. And again, I really like this quotation because I think it highlights that the positivity of getting past the discomfort and really seeing how having those conversations can make a a real significant impact to the way teams are able to move forward and work together. I mean, this was a team that worked very well together already, but I think going through the workshop really helped them to crystallize some of the sort of issues that were holding them back and help them to solidify their relationships and the way they support each other. And Abby, I think you were just going to share a case study with us from your side in terms of how you've used the tool.
Yes, that's right. We had a session with an organisation called The Key. It's a London-based organisation who provide expert information to schools. So they provide resources. And so their clients are schools all over the country who they provide up-to-date, relevant information for on legislation or any kind of reporting that the schools need to do. And the session was run with the management team, and they have separate teams of their own that they report to. And I think the first thing that came out from having the session with them was that when they were asked to think about the team and to answer questions, a majority of them thought about the teams they manage. They didn't really think about themselves as a management team. And I think the key criteria that they had was alignment, that was the biggest gap that they were finding. And so, simply from them realizing that they put the teams that they manage above the needs of themselves as a management team was a clear evidence of them not feeling aligned as a management team. And also something that came out of it was the communication issue that they all seemed to experience, where it seemed there was a one-way flow of information to the head of the management team, but they weren't speaking to each other as members of the team because there was this lack of alignment amongst them. And that realization really hit home. And toward the end of it, because the wonderful thing about the tool, but also the challenge about it, is that because it's a catalyst, a lot of conversations come out that people don't often have the opportunity to have with one another. So it's about looking and as a facilitator, going through the conversations and then helping the team members to really pinpoint on what what they should really focus on, and which key criteria they should work through, and creating an action plan and a team charter that they can all agree with and ensure that they maintain and keep on top of. So we really got them to drill down, and they agreed that they were going to have much more regular meetings with each other and really start to recognize one another as a support resource, that they could go and speak to each other and not just have a one-way conversation, but allow it to flow across themselves as a group, as a team, and also they wanted to use what they'd learned here to help their communication within the teams that they manage themselves. And so it's very likely we'll go back and actually run the TTI with the managers and their own teams as well. So it was a really great day, and I think they really appreciated having the opportunity and the conversations that they suddenly were able to have with one another.
Well, I think it's really interesting that team leaders often forget that they are also part of a leadership team. And it's such an important team within an organisation. And again, if the trust isn't there at the top of the organisation, how's that going to reflect in the individual teams? Yeah, no, absolutely. I thank you. That's a really interesting case study. And that's almost us done. I think we've given you an awful lot of information. So if people have questions or comments, what your first impressions are about this tool, then please do share with us. We do have a few minutes left before we need to wrap up. But just let me share with you a couple of things while you're formulating, hopefully, your questions. So just a little bit more information. We always send a follow-up email after our webinars. So we will include, this is just the web page to our site where it talks a little bit more about the process and what the workshop could look like. So I'll send that link round with the follow-up tomorrow. And just while I have you all, I just wanted to, for those of you who are in the UK, in London or sort of reachable distance. We're launching a new series of short masterclasses next month. Just to give you a heads up about those, again, an invitation should be going out to you in the next few days. But they're taking place here at our centre in Holland Park in the evening, so I think from 6 till 8. So short, sharp sessions, lots of practical takeaways, sort of skills-based, hopefully things that you can take back and use in your work the following day or week. So look out for more information on those. Does anyone have any final questions? Otherwise, we'll be able to wrap up. But what we'll do is we'll send out an email, as we always do, with a bit more information with the recording. Feel free to share the recording with any colleagues that you think might be interested. If you have any questions or thoughts after today, obviously feel free to drop me a line, or Pfizer and Scott, who some of you will know, are also on the webinar now, so feel free to be in touch with them as well. I can see perhaps there is a question coming through. Sorry, I've done something funny with that.
Thank you for joining us, Yolanda.
Thank you, Yolanda.
Hope it's been informative for everybody. And also, yes, I was going to say, if anybody wants any more information about the research that's behind it, if you let Kathy know, we're happy to share that with you as well.
There's an awful lot out there, actually, isn't there? And the thing that you shared with me that I found really interesting was the Edelman Research.
The barometer, yes, the trust barometer.
And I was reading just the other day, they did a piece specifically about people working in PR and communication and the change in kind of attitudes in the media. Because I think you said earlier, trust permeates through so many levels of society. It's, you know, we're talking about organizations, but the whole fake news thing that's been so prevalent in the last few years, kind of lack of trust in government.
In the media, it's big, yes, it's huge.
So it's very interesting. So it looks as though there aren't any more questions, so we won't keep you hanging. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. And like I say, do come back with any questions or comments that you might have. We'll also be sending out invites to our next webinar topic soon. As we always say, if you have any particular thoughts or ideas for other topics we can cover, let us know, and we'll do our best to meet those needs. But otherwise, we'll let you get on with the rest of your day. So thanks again. Have a great day and see you very soon. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.